Hi people, Morno Raven back here again. Going for a briefly different background in my front yard this time. Any nature lover will love this, of course, and even non-nature lovers will. Anyways, as the header suggests, I'm going to be discussing the tribal practices of tribes themselves in relation to spirituality, or better said, the spiritual practices in relation to tribes. So yeah, I'm going to dive right in. You can compare tribes, especially indigenous tribes that live in, for example, the rainforest or any desolated or semi-desolate naturistic environment. You know, when you think about indigenous tribes, just think about bush Negroes, think about Native Americans that still live the way the Incas and the Mayas did and whatnot, so their ancestors roughly estimated, or so to speak. And it just goes on. You can compare tribes at a spiritual level within occultism to a lesser version of major civilizations like the Norse, the Egyptians, and the Romans, or the Greeks, essentially. That's what you can compare them to. Not lesser as in worth less than them, but lesser as in up to a substantially smaller scale. Now, general spiritual practices that you'll come across with these tribes, most of them are similar. They are different in some way, shape, or form, though, but the differences are minor. Generally speaking, for example, Bush Negro tribes, they have, if you were to enter an indigenous village of a Bush Negro tribe, they would have something like a goal post, essentially. That's a goal post within soccer. So basically a contraption made up of two sidebars and one crossbar. And basically what that is like a spiritual doorway. The second you, as an outsider, walk either underneath that or past that, you inadvertently become privy or subject to the spiritual rules of that tribe itself. So basically you're bound by their spiritual rules. So if you do something, you mess with them in any way, then the guardian spirit, which most of these tribes have, the guardian spirit or guardian spirits that they work with will automatically wreak havoc on you or put you in your place, so to speak. Another tribal practice that you can think of, for example, is also that in Bush Negro tribes, for example, women are also not allowed when they're on their period to, for example, bathe or swim in certain parts of a river, a nearby river. Usually it's the river that the tribe gets drinking water from, or similar, you know, anything along those lines. And the reason for that is simple, because a period, in generally speaking, when women are on their period, it stands for spiritual it stands for spiritual impurification, so spiritual impurance, if you will. So being spiritually tainted. And usually most of these tribes, they have either one or more spirits they work with, but usually it's the one spirit that acts as a guardian and basically the caretaker of the entire village and or tribe. And that guardian spirit in general does not like it, because it basically stands for soiling his domain. Onto a lesser miscellaneous subject, the thing is that usually women are also told to not do that, because the tribe or the elders of the tribe or the priest of the tribe knows in general that, for example, certain parts of a river are inhabited by water spirits, could be water elementals or anything along those lines, or just a miscellaneous nature spirit who has that part of the river as his domain. And of course, the same way that you wouldn't like it when anyone comes around and pisses on your yard, urinates on your yard, or even anything else. In that same way, these spirits will not like stuff like that. They dislike it immensely, and obviously they're going to punish you accordingly. That's why also, up to a much lesser non-occult related extent, usually if you, for example, live in the third world and you venture into the outback a lot, places where there's a lot of nature present and whatnot, then you'll also be told to not just urinate anywhere. Especially if you're in the jungle, or if you're somewhere where not a lot of people go, you'll be prompted, generally speaking, even if it's in a non-verbal way, to specifically state that you're going to urinate, so in your own mind. Some go even further as to ask the soil for permission, essentially. Yeah, and the reason they do that is because, for the same reasons that I mentioned just now, but non-river related. You might have some spirit that has that part of as his habitat, and he doesn't want you to soil his area. He doesn't want you to soil his home, essentially. And if you don't heed that warning, it doesn't matter whether you're aware of it or not. If you don't heed that warning, then it might lead to trouble. So you simply need to be wary of that. It's something that you definitely need to take into account. So yeah, it doesn't matter whether it's your fault or not, or if it was beknownst to you or not, if you were aware of it. Stuff like that does happen on occasion. For example, hey, someone goes and just urinates somewhere, and it turns out that a spirit was there, and he didn't like that the person was urinating there because it's a place he either visits frequently, or if it's his home, and then all of a sudden the person starts urinating blood, or starts feeling dizzy or unwell, nauseous, anything you can think of. Yeah, stuff like that is, relatively speaking, by occult standards, quite common. And yeah, that's simply food for thought, stuff that you need to keep in mind. Tribes like these have ritual practices like that. Even back in the day, in times of slavery and colonial times, basically the 18th or 19th century, you also had tribes that, for example, came across malevolent spirits, and these spirits actually tricked them into thinking that they were the spirits they were looking after. Usually these tribes went in search of God, essentially, as in the highest spirit, and these spirits simply tricked them and made them do a bunch of atrocious things, like perform human sacrifices, perform cannibalism, you name it, things like that. Okay, that doesn't mean that human sacrifice in itself is inherently immoral. I'm not going to go into that, but my point is simply that stuff like that has happened. Okay, I've read upon that from reliable sources, and I found the story very intriguing and interesting. And yeah, it just goes to show you that you can also be fooled by a spirit, to the point where an entire tribe can be fooled by a spirit. Okay, honestly, bluntly put, I want to call the entire tribe stupid, but yeah, you know, that's the tribe, their problem. So yeah, those are in any case just a couple of examples that you'll come across. Usually these tribes within the subject that I discussed, usually these tribes also have a priest, essentially, that functions as an intermediary between the deity that they're working with. Doesn't matter what kind of deity it is, whether it was an actually existing spirit or an egregore, you name it, doesn't matter. And the tribe, essentially. But you can see how that, since the priest is the only source of information, how a priest can be easily corrupted, or a priest can easily become subject to corruption. Basically, let's just say a priest, the individual was the priest was an individual that had questionable morals. Then you can see for yourself how someone like that can easily just try to screw the entire tribe over. For example, you know, hey, the deity said you're supposed to give me one virgin every day, or one virgin every week for me to have sex with, to do as I please, and blah blah blah. You know, the same thing that you'll come across in modern society. In any situation where you only have one, for example, authoritative figure that a good deal of society is heavily reliant upon, how they become corrupt. The same way that social media, you see social media companies that have a good deal of the monopoly. You know, I'm not going to call any names. They are subject to corruption. In that same way, a priest can easily become corrupt, the priest of a tribe, in that same way, because there's no one to question or to control his authority. There's no quality control. There are no options that the tribe can go to, as in, hey, we'll just look for another priest, we'll just look for another this. Nah. The priest is the only hypothetical priest in town, so you can see the problems that you might encounter. So all of that stuff is stuff that tribes had to deal with. Indigenous tribes had to deal with back in the day, as well as the ones that still live the same way they did back in the day. They still have to deal with up to present day. So yeah, that is essentially it. See you guys later. Bye.